Yeah, okay, so everybody
She just said she's sorry, she's on her way.
it's okay. We know she's busy. Yeah, if you are just getting on to either the Zoom webinar or the Facebook live stream, which we have streaming from the Environment America Facebook page, we will have questions at the end and everything. Just make sure that if you're on the Facebook live stream, type your questions in the comment section, or sorry about that, or type it into the question or the chat portion of the Zoom webinar. And we're waiting on Representative Sharice Davids to come on. She is currently tied up in another conversation about race and equity with Representative Emanuel Cleaver from Kansas City, Missouri. So I guess, Kate, I will let you kind of start with the introductions and everything.
Great, thank you, Bridget. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Kate. I work with Environment Maryland, based in Baltimore. We wanted to give, for some of the new guests we have on, a little bit of background around what conservation conversations are. These were born out of the desire to allow people a space to still connect during, social distancing and isolation. We wanted to offer an opportunity, one, for people to connect and learn something new and continue to engage in this way. But two, we wanted to allow the opportunity for you to hear from people that maybe otherwise you wouldn't. I mean, I'm in Baltimore and I get to listen to Representative Davids talk. That's wild, that's so exciting. The other huge goal for this was to allow people the opportunity to get a new perspective and new information about a topic that maybe we've never had time to consider. We're in this time where I think the value of nature is so clear as we're stuck inside of our homes. And so a lot of this has been this opportunity to kind of reshift our thinking and our perspective around some different nature topics and conservation topics. We also wanted to say that, we want to start with the acknowledgement that our country is hurting right now. The environmental movement has a problematic history, and we want to come out and acknowledge that first and foremost, and say that, we are committed to learning and doing this work, and that we know that there can be no climate justice without racial justice. And so we want to begin with that vital acknowledgement. And again, thank you all for coming. So, with that note, I'm going to turn it over to Bridget to introduce the guests that we will have here in a moment, and sort of give some more info about the logistics and how it's going to go down. So thank you, Bridget.
Yeah, so as Kate said, I'm Bridget Sanderson. I am the Director of Environment Missouri, based out of Kansas City. And we do have, I'm just going to keep updating everybody on Sharice's status. Sorry, Representative Sharice. She is just getting off of a call right now with Representative Emanuel Cleaver. They were talking about race and equity, which is, of course, very important right now, especially with the state of our nation. So we're just kind of getting started. So I will go ahead and read her introduction, even though we're still waiting on her. And then if she's still not on by then, maybe we'll ask Coletta her questions as well. So Representative, sorry, I'm so sorry, guys. So Representative Davids was raised by a single mother who served in the Army for 20 years. After graduating from Leavenworth High School, she worked her way through Johnson County Community College and the University of Missouri, Kansas City, before earning a law degree from Cornell Law School. As a first-generation college student who worked the entire time while she was in college, Representative Davids understands the importance of quality public schools and affordable higher education. It is that foundation that allowed her to go on to a successful career focused on economic and community development, which included time as a White House fellow under President Barack Obama. When she was sworn into the 116th Congress, Representative Davids became one of the first 2 Native American women to serve in Congress. Representative Davids has centered her work in office on putting Kansans first, fighting to limit the influence of special interests and make healthcare more affordable and accessible to everyone. So with that, oh, she's here. Hi, Representative.
Hello. I'm trying to change it because it says I'm Coletta.
There you go. Perfect.
Oh, right. Will everybody be able to see me and hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead.
Oh.
Sorry I was late. I did get to see some of what you were saying, and I also caught the whole part about I think she can get on soon, and then I was like, I'm here. I just couldn't figure out how to get into the right place. So sorry about that.
That's fair.
I was like raising my hand and typing into the Q&A box.
Completely understandable. Yeah, so Representative Davids, we kind of started off this conversation just, talking about the current state of affairs and what is going on, with the Black Lives Matter movement and the police and all of the protests and everything. And so, we kind of, to give everybody kind of a background about it, we had scheduled this conservation conversations for quite a few weeks now. And you still were willing to sit down and talk about conservation with us, which we are massively appreciative for. But so we just kind of want to start off and kind of ask you, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And why do you kind of feel that it's important to still talk about conservation this week?
Yeah, so I'm glad. Well, first of all, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks for the work you all are doing. So I think there's a couple of things I would say to that. I am glad that you mentioned that I feel like we've been trying to make sure that this conversation happens for a long time. So I appreciate you mentioning that. And then I also appreciate you right at the top bringing up the issues of racial justice or injustice that that have been at the top of, frankly, it's been at the top of a lot of people's minds for a long time. And I think right now we're seeing it at the top of the minds of kind of the mainstream media and that sort of thing. I think certainly we're in there's a collective trauma that we're both witnessing and that the country is experiencing. I say witnessing because I do think that the killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery are ones that have continued the trauma that our Black communities have been dealing with for a long time. And then now we're seeing a lot of people come out and stand with and support our Black communities, and I think that that's really important. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I imagine that sometimes it's probably easier for organizations to solely focus on a specific topic and not bring things up because they're difficult to talk about here and see. So I think that it's important to talk about really issues around what I would consider to be equity and racial justice, and in this country are they're overarching. And certainly when we talk about environmental justice, you can't really have a full conversation about that without also talking about the disproportionate negative impacts that environmental issues have when it comes to Black communities and other communities of color. I think that this topic it's always relevant to bring up. And I think that basically answers the question that you asked, but I will say that, you know, there have been a lot of movements during this country's history that should have been more focused on racial justice from the very beginning. And I'm glad to see that those conversations have been attempting to be more inclusive. I think you mentioned it, I was just having a conversation with Emmanuel Cleaver, the congressman from right next door. And I think I'll get to talk a little bit about my district and that sort of thing in a couple of minutes, but he's been a leader he was the mayor of Kansas City. He has been a leader in the Democratic caucus in the House and in the Congressional Black Caucus, and is also a faith leader. And he has brought up the need to make sure that we understand that we have to be thinking about this stuff all the time. And yeah, so I appreciate the number of people who are I get a chance to meet with and talk to about this stuff on a daily basis.
Yeah, we're incredibly appreciative as well. So thank you so much for coming on. And I'm pretty sure that environmental justice and everything that's happening right now will be a pretty standard theme across this entire conversation. So I would just like to reiterate, if you have any questions throughout, put them in the chat or on the Facebook live stream comment section, and we can get to them. Try to get to as many of them as possible. So
I'll try to keep my answers on the shorter side so we can get to more of them.
Oh, I mean,
half the time it's my fault.
You can just keep talking. You're brilliant. So I did kind of want to hear a little bit about how, you know, you became one of the first Native American congresswomen, how you got to this position. And then, like you kind of mentioned earlier, I would also like you to describe a little bit about the Kansas 3rd Congressional District as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I won't take up a ton of time on this part. So I definitely have a non-traditional path to Congress. Like a lot of my colleagues that are serving in the 116th Congress is the most diverse class ever to come into Congress. I often say though that there's a ton of work still to do. So you know, we are one of the steps. I think the step was just a little bit bigger this time toward getting parity in Congress for what our society actually looks like. And just so folks know, the 3rd district is of Kansas is in the Kansas City metro area. So it includes all of Johnson County, which is essentially the suburbs of Kansas City. But when most people think of Kansas City, they think of Kansas City, Missouri, except the president when we won the Super Bowl, and then it was the great state of Kansas. But there is Kansas City, Kansas is in Wyandotte County. It's its own city with its own unique history and vibrancy and life. And so all of Wyandotte County, all of Johnson County, and then a small portion of Miami County, which is actually where you start to see a little more of the rural areas that folks might think about when they think of Kansas. So I am Ho-Chunk, which is a tribe in Wisconsin, but my mom was in the Army for 20 years, from before I was born till after I got out of high school. And she retired while she was stationed at Fort Leavenworth, which is here in Kansas, but it's just outside the district that I get to represent now. Graduated from high school while I was there. And then I'm a first generation college student. I went to Johnson County Community College and then on to the University of Missouri in Kansas City. That whole process took me 8 years. It took me 4 years to get my associate's degree, 4 years to get my bachelor's degree. And I was working the whole time I was doing that. I often tell people that I have what I consider to be an experience that is not at all uncommon. I mean, now it is. Like, this is definitely an uncommon experience, I think even for members of Congress, this last 2 years. But I mean, it's not uncommon to be raised by a single parent. It's not uncommon to be a first-generation college student, or to work the entire time you're in school, or to take 8 years to get a bachelor's degree. These things are, in my view, pretty kind of usual experiences of a lot of folks. We don't see that in Congress as often, or in the leadership of even state governments, federal government for sure. And so I just share that part, and then I'll and then I think we can move on. The reason I share that part is because I think that that's the most amazing thing about this this new set of folks who came into Congress, is that it's not just the diversity of professional backgrounds. It's not just the diversity of gender and race and the number of LGBTQ folks who are now in Congress. It is also that those experiences that we bring help make sure that people recognize that there are a ton of different experiences, and they believe that that's true. Because I think that for a long time, there has been an assumption that there's kind of one way that things happen. And if they happened any other way, then it's not because people have different experiences. It's because something has gone awry with somebody. It's not unusual to take 8 years to get a bachelor's degree, because lots of people have to work while they're in school. And so there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a different model than what some people think of as the successful way to do things. And so I think that, to me, that's one of the most amazing pieces of what we're seeing with a kind of more diverse, newer set of non-traditional candidates that got elected this past year.
Great. So I'm going to get to ask the next question. We're going to ping pong back and forth again. Thank you so much, Representative, for being here. Our next question is, with federal rollbacks happening, especially right now during the COVID-19 pandemic, including the Clean Water Act and the mercury and air toxic standards, how do you see yourself and Congress working to help sort of further to protect the environment in the age of rollbacks and reversals?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm glad you brought that up, because I mean, first of all, I've been devastated to see the way that this administration has been, they've rolled back landmark environmental protections and standards, and to do that during the fear and anxiety and frankly, the unpredictability that's going on because of the pandemic. I feel like this is a dangerous attempt to just sneak these rollbacks past the American people. I know there are a lot of people who do not know that this is happening. It's part of why I appreciate you all doing conversations like this, because this is a way for people to see, that they've been trying to sneak these rollbacks past the public. And it's because people are focused right now on their health and their safety and their economic security and putting food on the table. But the long after this pandemic is over, we're going to be dealing with the ramifications of the actions that this administration has been will continue to take until I'm looking forward to November. I'm not going to say anything else about that, but I am. So, moving forward, I think that some of what we need to be thinking about is how we make investments in sustainable and resilient infrastructure that really strengthens and protects the different communities that have been negatively impacted. We have to think about those topics of environmental justice when we're doing that, and definitely continue to call for oversight. I have very publicly called on the administration, whether it's the president or at the EPA, to, stop the rollbacks that they're doing. And I think one of the worst things, in my opinion, is that they're doing it during a time when they know that people do not have the bandwidth to be able to pay attention to every single thing that's going on. But the oversight that we're conducting and the calls on the administration, I think they're important, regardless of if the action happens immediately, because in the long term, and I feel like the folks who work on issues of climate change and environmental issues recognize that we have to be thinking about this stuff long term. It is always important for us to make sure that we're shining a light on what's happening in our government, because in the long term, that does pay off.
Yeah, that's great. Great to hear. So you have been we've been working, Environment America and Environment Missouri and Environment Maryland have been working a whole bunch on the Land and Water Conservation Fund, or the LWCF. And for anybody who doesn't know what the LWCF is, it is funded actually through a $900 million royalty from the offshore oil and gas industry. And it's actually used to fund a lot of our public spaces and our public lands, everything from the Grand Tetons National Park to your local baseball field can get funding for the LWCF. And so it hasn't been fully funded for a long time. And I know that you're a champion for it to be, reauthorized and fully funded. And so I'm just curious, because currently right now, more than half of the funds are actually redistricted to non-conservation budgets. So I'm curious, why is the LWCF important for you, for your district, and the nation as a whole, and why do you think it should be fully funded?
Yeah, well, I'm glad here's one of the things I am glad that we're having this conversation, because I do think that, one of the things that ends up happening is it's hard to break through the noise, right? It's hard to break through the noise of, for a long time, it was the antics, frankly, of our president that would take up so much of the oxygen in the room. When I think it's really important that for purposes of the LWCF, this type of program is good for or important to the 3rd district and many other districts, because it provides matching grants to cities and counties that are looking to expand accessibility to natural areas, to water resources, and our cultural heritage sites, and to provide recreation opportunities for folks in this area. And, using the depletion of one resource, the offshore oil and gas, to support the conservation of vital resources like land and water, I think is I think that's a good thing. I also just kind of personally, just so folks know, I think that the things that people sometimes don't really think about, but and less pressed to do so, is how often we make use of, we've got our Kaw Valley, site here, that there are all kinds of amazing things that happen in that area. We've got the Shawnee Mission Park here, and we've got all these areas. I took my dog for a walk out there the other day, and especially right now when we have to practice social distancing, could you imagine us not having these kinds of resources that are protected and maintained? And so I think that I think it's really, really important to note that one, it's important to me that we that we fund, fully fund, I should say, the LWCF, but also that I think that this is one of those areas where we can see some bipartisan support. Conservation is an area where we will sometimes see folks coming together to talk about ways that we can, fully fund the LWCF and do things like invest in the critical repair needs of our national parks and public lands. Sometimes people are coming at it from different directions. Someone might be a hunter and that's why they care, and that sort of thing. But I mean, when you've got Democratic and Republican House members and senators saying that we should be fully funding this, I think that's a really important thing.
Yep, sorry, I started to talk and was on mute, but that's phenomenal, thank you. We also wanted to ask, as a member of the Ho-Chunk Nation, how do you see environmental advocates lifting the voices of Native Americans as some of the earliest and strongest proponents of environmentalism, or not?
Yeah, well, I think it's really important. I guess one thing I would say is it's important to note that there's a lot of Native Americans out there who are themselves environmental activists and advocates and are doing work in this space and have been for a long time. That the two aren't necessarily separate and apart from each other. And then I think it's really interesting because I think that there are kind of two different ways that I think about this. One is, when I think about the activism that we see, where people are, and advocacy, where people are trying to save sacred sites and trying to reduce the amount of oil extraction and that sort of thing. Certainly the intersection of how those things play out with Native communities exists partly because of the removal of Native people to lands that sometimes were places where those natural resources, non-renewable resources, were at, and then I think what we ended up seeing was a lot of either additional removal or a lot of times just a complete taking of land and resources. So I think that there's been kind of this long history of whether it was from tribal governments or from individual Native people, just kind of fighting to make sure that that wasn't happening. And then the other piece, which I think is not necessarily, I think it's not necessarily talked about as often in this way, is you see it in a lot of, so first of all, every tribe is different. Native communities are not a monolith, but you see tribal governments instituting and implementing rules or regulations or laws or ordinances. It depends on the tribe, where they're acknowledging and recognizing that we have to be good stewards of this place, and that we should be trying to leave something better for the next generation and the one after that and the one after that. And so I think that I think that there's elements of that are just kind of often worked into the functioning of a tribe and how they make use of and are stewards of the place that they live. I think that that's a really important piece of it. And it does look different for every tribe. It just depends. Thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, of course. And I think that a lot of the native tribes have been really wonderful stewards and just have worked so hard for environmentalism as well. So thank you for that. So this is part of your bread and butter as part of the
infrastructure.
What now?
Oh,
I
just said
yeah,
infrastructure.
Transportation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly that. So as part of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, how do you see infrastructure as a means to protect our public spaces, clean air, and clean water?
Yeah, so you're right. This is so just so everybody knows, the reason that Bridget says my bread and butter is because almost every conversation I have with anybody often ends up being about transportation and infrastructure. So full disclosure, I'm a born again transportation enthusiast. I spent a year at the Department of Transportation, and just so folks know, I think like a lot of people, I had not spent a ton of time truly examining and thinking about the ways that transportation and infrastructure policy and investments impact every aspect of our lives. And when we talk about ways that we can set our grandchildren up for a thriving economy, ways that we can make our society more resilient and sustainable. I mean, transportation and infrastructure is absolutely a huge piece of that. On the opportunity side, like this is the way that we get to all of the places that we need to get to. If it's our jobs, our places of worship, our places of recreation, education, all of these things. And then it's also how we access so many things related to public health. So right now, this is at the top of a lot of people's minds because, if you live in a place where you don't have access to clean water, and one of the primary ways that you're told you can protect yourself from the coronavirus is by washing your hands for 20 seconds, that leaves you definitely feeling ignored by the government. But it also highlights the stress test that we're seeing right now on issues of infrastructure and the way that that's like completely intertwined with public health. It has to be part of the conversation going forward. I was talking to some kids the other day. I read a book. I think it was Grace for President. I've got like Grace for President and Grace Goes to Washington. And afterwards, we were talking, and I think one of them asked me, like, what about, what do you get excited about or something to that effect? And I was like, oh, infrastructure. And, and I was telling them it might not seem that important, but if you try to flush your toilet and it doesn't work, it feels pretty important. And mostly it was the parents on there that were laughing, but I do think that there are elements of this that we just kind of, you don't think about it unless something has gone wrong, right? But we do have an opportunity right now with the investments that we can make in more resilient, more sustainable, that move toward renewables. Also increasing things like access to broadband, which I think is part of infrastructure. These are the things that we can be doing to not only make us more resilient just in terms of rebounding economically, but also in the most basic sense of resilience when we're talking about climate change and the impacts that, for this region specifically, severe weather events often lead to flooding. And, we've got the Kansas and Missouri meet right here. And then in other parts of the country where severe weather events lead to flooding because of the desertification of so many areas. These are the kinds of things that our infrastructure can help reduce those impacts. Transportation can bring down emissions if we're investing in the, in better technologies. I mean, building codes. Buildings are like one of the most, they contribute, I think it's like I don't want to say, I might be wrong. I think it's like the second most in terms of emissions. And the federal government we haven't updated our building code since the 80s. I'm working on it. I think I could probably like continue on for a lot of minutes, but I know we're gonna maybe a couple more questions here. So
yeah, we're gonna transition now, I think, to questions from our guests, because
oh yeah,
I have gotten to ask you so many. So to anyone who's in attendance, either on the live or on Zoom, you can put them in the chat in either place and we'll ask them. We do encourage some amount of brevity in your wording of the questions so we can keep the representative on schedule.
I'll try. And brevity of the answers, I thought you said for some reason.
Brevity of the wording.
No, Representative, we want you to just keep talking forever.
Yes,
so.
forever. So one of the questions that we have received is, could the representative talk about measures to work on environmental issues and climate change equitably? So anything that's happening at the federal level on that, or in Kansas?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think in a lot of ways, this kind of touches on the environmental justice issues that we were talking about earlier. So there are a couple of things that I think are really important here. One is recognizing where inequities exist. And I think for a long time, we haven't, there have been a lot of people who have been in decision-making positions who either intentionally or unintentionally built some inequities into our infrastructure systems and that sort of thing. We see this in the highway system. We see this in the ways that different power grids are set up around the country and that sort of thing. Who has access to clean water and who doesn't? So I think, of course, the first piece is recognizing that there's an issue. And I do think that there is, first of all, there are a lot of groups that are advocating around this issue. So it's helpful because it helps educate policymakers about this sort of thing. And please never underestimate the power that you have advocating to your elected officials and policymakers. And I say that because, we learn, our team, in our meetings that we have, we learn about all kinds of things that we did not know about ahead of time. I have spent a lot of time thinking about equity in transportation. There's a Transportation Equity Caucus that we have one in the House. There's also a Transportation Equity Caucus that's comprised of other organizations like the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights and Policy Link and all kinds of, there's a lot of people who are focusing on this. But I still often learn things when I have conversations with folks who are, doing the work, which is a very different thing than the policy making. So please never underestimate the power you have to advocate to your electeds. And then, in the House Transportation Committee, some of what we've done. So first of all, I'll say like kind of a quick what we've done around both climate and equity. So first of all, we have included so many provisions in bills that have been either reauthorized or introduced that require an examination of issues of impact. How is this impacting various communities? And then we also have been having, I wasn't here before, but just so everybody knows, the first hearing that we had, I'm pretty sure it was the first one, related, but to be on the safe side, I'll say one of the first hearings that we had on transportation and infrastructure was about specifically how does transportation and infrastructure impact climate change. And in that conversation, the number of folks who brought up issues of equity, it was pretty phenomenal to hear so many elected officials bringing this up versus only having outside groups bringing it up, if that makes any sense. I was encouraged to see it. And then I do think that, you know, some of what we're seeing in these upcoming pieces of legislation. So folks should know that the INVEST Act was introduced. The draft bill text came out yesterday. I don't know what day it is. And I think it's, you know, I think it's a bill that moves us in a really good direction. You know, trying to make sure that we're thinking about transit, trying to make sure that we're thinking about the climate impacts. You know, I think that those kinds of things are going to be really important going forward. But the most important takeaway, I think, is like, please don't stop advocating to the electeds.
I promise I won't. Yeah, and I think that that's really pointed in how passionate you are about transportation issues, and especially transportation and equity, specifically in the Kansas City area, because we've got, you know, more miles of highway per capita, and cars are expensive. And so I think that I love the fact that you are on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, you know. But anyway, completely side point from transportation. So I know that when you started running, you have said openly a few times that, you know, I always thought I was going to run on climate change, and that was going to be my big issue. And so once you like started going out and talking to constituents and everything, they started bringing up affordable healthcare, that was their biggest concern. And so you kind of, you know, not that you weren't ever advocating for affordable healthcare, but you just kind of were like, oh, this is what's most important to my constituents. So I'd like to hear just really quickly, if because we don't want to take up too much time, but how those two issues, healthcare and climate change, kind of interact with one another.
Yeah, and I know I don't want to, I'll try not to repeat some of the things that I said earlier, because I know I've kind of talked a little bit about the ways that, you know, climate impacts climate, infrastructure, transportation. These things impact every aspect of our lives. But definitely, you know, when you think about health outcomes and things like social determinants of health, certainly how you know, how our infrastructure and transportation system are tied into that. So just because I know you were saying that you're excited about me, I'm also excited about being on the committee, which is hopefully clear, I guess. But yeah, I mean, when I was thinking, when the idea popped into my head about running for Congress, and I was kind of like, you know, what do I believe to be the top issues? You know, it could have been self-selection or something like that, but I definitely thought climate was going to be the number one thing. And then, and I should have known healthcare was going to be the number one thing I would hear about. I mean, I myself did not have health insurance until I got this job. So I think that what I saw when I went out and I was talking to people is the access to healthcare issue, the protections for pre-existing conditions, the skyrocketing prescription drug costs. Like these topics came up over and over and over. And then if the conversation went on long enough, depending on what type of conversation it was, if we were in a forum type of conversation, if we were in, you know, a small group setting, we would have, you know, to start off with, almost always the first questions The first comments, the first stories had to do with access to healthcare. And then it was in general, maybe the third thing that got brought up was climate issues. And I would also say that there was a pretty good mixture of people who are from a much younger demographic and a much older demographic. So I do think there's this kind of perception about who it is that cares about climate issues. And I think that the common way you hear about it is all wrong. From my experience and what I've seen, it's everybody. I mean, tons of people are talking about it from all demographics, from all age groups, race, and all of it. Geography. People care because it impacts how their life plays out, their life expectancy. It impacts so much. And I mentioned this earlier a little bit, but I think that, it's really important that we, as a House, and the Democratic majority has made climate a high priority issue. Healthcare is a high priority issue, and I think we're going to continue to see that. In fact, I saw that Coletta shared the Invest Act info, so folks should check that out. And we're going to keep having hearings. We've had something like 70 hearings where we've centered climate issues, and I think that's a really important thing. And in the long term, it will help our health outcomes for sure.
Definitely, yeah. So we are going to try to wrap up now. Thank you again so much for being here. We've covered a lot of ground in a fairly short amount of time. I'm really grateful for that. There is one more question that just popped in the Q&A, and then we have a question we always end with, so I'm going to sort of fuse them. The question was, is there a plan at the federal level for renewable energy systems? So that's kind of the question that was in the Q&A. And then the question we always end with is, we have this incredible moment of getting to talk to you, a congressperson, and so often we're all thinking, what can we do? So is there one piece of advice that for everyone listening, everyone on the call, that we can take with us back into our life to be a part of the solution to a lot of these problems we've talked about?
Yeah. I think on the first piece, I would say there's two things about the kind of plan going forward, and I do this because it's going to take a number of pieces of legislation, because of the way that the federal government works, that Congress works, that these different committees work. I will say, though, that, again, I wasn't here before. It does feel to me like there's a lot more crosstalk isn't the right, collaboration, I suppose, is what I would call it. The Energy and Commerce Committee handles a bunch of stuff around like clean drinking water, around the grid, around broadband. Transportation and infrastructure handles things like, emergency management is under our jurisdiction. I just realized I'm like getting all excited because I'm talking about committees of jurisdiction. But so like transportation and infrastructure handles, in a lot of ways we handle how energy is going to be used by the federal government. Aviation, whether it's trucking or cars that we're using, railroad. There's all these different pieces where the decisions we make impact the move toward renewables and the speed with which we move toward renewables. I had heard previously about like the kind of clashes that happened between the various committees around, you know, how are we going to move forward? And the way this Invest Act played out, it was more of a conversation about making sure that we're moving toward something together, rather than the committee's trying to be like, okay, that's my piece, I'm going to do that, and that's your piece, and I'm not going to worry about what you're doing over there. It's been really, to me, that's a really encouraging thing, because so much of the problems, there are a lot of problems that happen with the federal government because of the silos, because you've got, you know, you've got the Department of Transportation working on something, and then you've got, you know, the energy department working on something. And if we're talking about electrification of vehicles, you know, how are we getting that electricity is a really important piece of the puzzle when what we're trying to do is reduce emissions. You know, if we're burning up a whole bunch of coal to get the electricity for an electric vehicle, that's not the solution that we're looking for, you know. So I would say that it happens the way it does partly because of the way the system is set up, but we are seeing a lot more inter-committee conversations, and I think that's really, really good. What you guys can do, I mean, I said earlier, like, don't underestimate the power of your advocacy. It matters. You know, it might sometimes feel like you're like, I already talked to them about this. I already talked to them about this. You know, I sometimes say I like to be pleasantly persistent, because, you know, there are going to be some policymakers, 100% of the time, they're on the same page as you. They're, you know, co-sponsoring the things that you want. They're like sending letters to, you know, or helping you with getting other people onto some piece of legislation that's going to be really helpful or good for the environment. And then there's going to be some that are never in the same, you know, they just, it's just not their thing. And, you know, it could be that they don't care, or it could literally just be like, that's not one of my priorities and I'm not going to spend time on it. We don't know. Every lawmaker is different, or policymaker is different. But there's going to be a ton of people who are in between that. And sometimes they'll be with you, and sometimes they won't. And the more times you can get them into the, okay, I'm with you on this one. Okay, I'm with you on this one. That, I mean, sometimes that's literally just like making appointments, sending them information, asking other people to call their office. You know, I think that those things, to me, that seems like those things actually do make a difference. It might not feel like it all the time, but I think they do.
Yeah, I very much agree with that as well, since that's my entire job.
Yeah.
But so we're going to let you go because I know that we're running a little bit behind. So thank you so much, Representative Davids, for coming on. I truly appreciate you, and I appreciate all the work you're doing, and for coming on here and chatting with us as well. Please give your puppy dog name.
Oh yeah. Oh, I should have. She's probably outside running around. I'm very happy that we have her here, and we got her from Casey Pet Project, and she was very skinny when we got her, and now she's kind of like buff. So
that's good.
yeah, she loves going for walks.
Yeah,
thanks
absolutely.
so much. I appreciate the time tonight, and I'm glad you all are doing what you do.
Yeah, thank you so much, and hopefully we can get that LWCF fully funded as well within the next week or so.
Yeah.
Again, thank you so much.
We'll stay in touch about it.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, we'll stay in touch about it.
Yes, absolutely. That would be wonderful. So thank you so much, Representative Davids. I'll let you off, and then Kate and I can kind of do our sign off as well. So
awesome. Sounds good. See you all later. Have a good night.
Yeah, so thank you everybody for coming on and interacting with us and Representative Davids. Again, if you like what we're doing, what our work is, please consider donating to Environment America, Environment Missouri, Environment Maryland, also the Land and Water Conservation Fund Coalition as well. And thank you again so much. I know that this time is really hard to sit down and be behind a computer. So thank you so much for taking the time out and joining us. Do you have anything else?
I just want to echo what you said. Thank you all. And, there were so many great questions about the intersection of our work and racial justice. And I think I'm excited and am ready to keep having those conversations. And so thank you all. And if there's anything else we can do to help you, please don't hesitate to reach out to Bridget or I. Me, Bridget or me.
Thanks, y'all.